My name is Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds. I am 39 years old and I hold the rank of Major General in the United States Marine Corps. But none of that mattered when I stood in the parking lot of Riverside Memorial Chapel, watching through rain-streaked windows as my own family celebrated my father's life without me. They had made it clear I wasn't welcome. I was the disgrace, the daughter who had chosen duty over family, who had brought shame to the Reynolds name by pursuing a life they could never understand. What they didn't know was that my father had left me something that would change everything, and what was about to happen in the next 10 minutes would shatter their carefully constructed lives forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in the Reynolds household felt like living in a museum where I was the only exhibit that didn't belong. Our home in Millbrook, Connecticut was a sprawling colonial with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens that my mother, Patricia, tended with the same meticulous attention she gave to maintaining our family's reputation in the community. My father, Robert Reynolds, was a prominent real estate developer who built half the luxury subdivisions in Fairfield County. My mother was the president of the Junior League and sat on 3 charity boards. They moved through their social circles with practiced grace, always perfectly dressed, always saying the right things, always maintaining the image of a successful American family. But I was the crack in their perfect facade. From my earliest memories, I was different. While my older brother Marcus excelled at tennis and my younger sister Charlotte took ballet lessons, I was the one who climbed trees, scraped my knees, and came home with dirt under my fingernails. My mother would look at me with barely concealed disappointment, her lips pressed into a thin line as she tried to smooth my unruly hair. "Sarah, dear," she would say in that tone that sounded sweet but felt like ice, "young ladies don't climb fences. Young ladies don't get into fights with the neighborhood boys. Young ladies certainly don't dream of becoming soldiers." But I did dream of it. From the time I was 8 years old and saw a documentary about women in the military, I knew that was my path. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining myself in uniform, serving something greater than the shallow social expectations that suffocated everyone around me. The dinner table conversations were always the same. Marcus would talk about his latest business internship or his golf handicap. Charlotte would discuss her upcoming debutante season or her acceptance to Vassar. And when they turned to me, expecting me to contribute something equally palatable to their world, I would mention my interest in military history or my plans to attend a service academy. The silence that followed was always deafening. My father would clear his throat and change the subject. My mother would smile that brittle smile and ask Charlotte about her dress for the upcoming charity gala. Marcus would smirk and shake his head, as if I had just announced my intention to join the circus. I learned early that my dreams were not acceptable topics of conversation in the Reynolds household. The first real confrontation came when I was 16. I had been accepted to a summer leadership program at West Point, a competitive opportunity that would give me insight into military life and help prepare me for the academy application process. I was thrilled, proud, and certain that even my family would recognize this as an achievement worth celebrating. I was wrong. I remember presenting the acceptance letter to my parents after dinner, my hands trembling slightly with excitement. My father took the letter, read it slowly, and then set it down on the mahogany dining table with deliberate care. "Sarah," he said, his voice measured and cold, "this is not the path we've planned for you. We've already spoken to the admissions committee at Connecticut College. They're expecting your application." "But Dad," I started, "this is what I want to do with my life. This is who I am." My mother stood up, smoothing her skirt with precise movements. "What you want and what's appropriate are 2 very different things, dear. We've indulged in this phase long enough. It's time to focus on your real future." Phase? The word hit me like a physical blow. This isn't a phase, Mom. This is my calling. Charlotte, who had been sitting quietly through the exchange, finally spoke up. "Sarah, you're being dramatic. Nobody actually joins the military unless they have to. It's not exactly sophisticated." That word, sophisticated, became the weapon they used against me for the next 2 years. Everything I wanted, everything I dreamed of, was dismissed as unsophisticated, inappropriate, or simply beneath the standards they had set for their children. When I announced my intention to apply to the Naval Academy, they refused to provide the parental permission required for a minor. When I turned 18 and could apply independently, they made it clear that if I chose that path, I would be choosing it alone. "Don't expect us to support this decision," my father said the night before I left for Annapolis. "And don't expect us to pretend we're proud when you realize you've made a mistake." But I didn't make a mistake, I thrived. The discipline, the challenge, the sense of purpose. Everything that felt foreign and uncomfortable in my childhood home felt natural at the academy. I found myself among people who understood that service meant something, that there were causes worth sacrificing for, that strength and determination were virtues, not character flaws. I graduated third in my class, commissioned as a second lieutenant, and immediately began the path that would define the next 2 decades of my life. I served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. I led Marines through some of the most challenging operations of the modern era. I earned decorations for valor, leadership, and distinguished service. And through it all, my family remained distant, disapproving, and largely absent. They didn't attend my commissioning ceremony. They didn't visit when I was stationed stateside. When I was wounded by an IED blast outside Fallujah and spent 3 months recovering at Walter Reed, I received flowers from my commanding officer, visits from my fellow Marines, and concerned calls from colleagues I had served with years earlier. My family sent a card. It was signed simply, "Hope you recover quickly, the Reynolds family." Not love, not "we're proud of you," not "we were worried." Just a generic sentiment that could have been sent to any acquaintance. But the most painful moment came when I was promoted to colonel. It was a significant milestone, representing years of dedicated service and exceptional performance. The ceremony was held at Quantico, and for the first time in years, I decided to reach out personally. I called my father. "Dad," I said when he answered, "I wanted to let you know that I'm being promoted to colonel next month. The ceremony is on the 15th, and I'd really like you to be there." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear the sound of ice clinking in a glass, the murmur of conversation from what sounded like a dinner party. "Sarah," he said finally, "that's very nice, dear. We have the Patterson wedding that weekend, though. You understand." The Patterson wedding. A social obligation for people I had never met. People who meant nothing to our family, beyond their status in the Connecticut social hierarchy. That was more important than watching his daughter achieve one of the highest ranks in the military. I hung up the phone and sat in my quarters for a long time, staring at the wall, feeling the familiar ache of rejection settle deep in my chest. But I had learned to carry that weight. I had learned to find validation in my work, in the Marines under my command, in the missions we completed and the lives we saved. I had built a family of choice from the men and women who served alongside me, who understood what it meant to put duty before comfort, service before self. I stopped expecting them to understand. I stopped hoping they would see me. And I thought I had made peace with that reality until the day my father died. And I realized that some wounds never truly heal. They just teach you how to live with the pain. The call came on a Tuesday morning at 0530 hours. I was at Camp Lejeune, reviewing operational plans for an upcoming training exercise when my aide knocked on my office door. "Ma'am, you have an urgent call on line 2. It's personal." I picked up the phone, expecting news about a fellow Marine, maybe an emergency involving one of my officers. Instead, I heard the voice of Dr. Hamilton, my father's longtime physician. "Major General Reynolds, I'm calling to inform you that your father suffered a massive heart attack this morning. He was pronounced dead at Greenwich Hospital at 4:47 a.m. The words seemed to float in the air for a moment before settling into reality. I found myself gripping the edge of my desk, my training taking over as my mind automatically shifted into crisis management mode. "I understand, Doctor. What are the next steps regarding arrangements?" "Your mother asked me to call you. The family is handling the arrangements through Riverside Memorial Chapel. The service is scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Friday, 3 days away. I quickly calculated travel time, the logistics of getting leave approved, the dozen things that would need to be rearranged. "Thank you for calling, Dr. Hamilton." I'll be there. But even as I hung up the phone, I felt a strange emptiness where grief should have been. My father was dead, and instead of overwhelming sadness, I felt nothing. Just the mechanical process of obligation, the sense that I needed to be there, not because I wanted to, but because it was the right thing to do. I flew into LaGuardia Thursday evening and drove straight to my hotel in Greenwich. I hadn't been back to Connecticut in 4 years, and the familiar streets felt foreign now, like visiting a place you once lived in a dream. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I called my mother from the hotel room. "Hello, Patricia Reynolds speaking." Her voice was composed, controlled. Even in grief, she maintained her perfect telephone manner. "Mom, it's Sarah. I just wanted to let you know I'm in town for the service tomorrow." There was a pause. Not the pause of someone processing unexpected news, but the pause of someone carefully choosing their words. "Sarah." "Yes, well, I suppose you felt you needed to come." The coldness in her voice was immediate and unmistakable. No acknowledgement of shared loss. No recognition that I had just lost my father, too. Just that calculated distance she had perfected over the years. "Of course I came, Mom. He was my father." "Yes, well, we've made the arrangements. It's going to be a small, intimate service. Family and close friends only. People who really knew Robert, who understood what he meant to this community." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't a person who really knew him. I wasn't someone who understood what he meant to their world. "I'll see you tomorrow at the chapel," I said quietly. "Sarah, wait." Her voice took on that tone I remembered from childhood. The one she used when delivering news she expected me to accept without argument. "I think it would be best if you didn't attend the actual service." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? You haven't been part of this family for years. You chose your path, and we respected that choice. But tomorrow is about celebrating Robert's life with the people who were actually in it. Your presence would be disruptive." Disruptive. The word echoed in my mind as I tried to process what I was hearing. "Mom, he was my father. I'm not asking for a special role in the service. I just want to say goodbye. You said goodbye 20 years ago when you chose the military over your family. You can't expect to walk back into our lives now just because it's convenient." The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, still holding the phone, staring at the generic artwork on the wall. At that moment, the full weight of their rejection settled over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just that they disapproved of my choices, they had completely erased me from their family narrative. But I had survived worse than this. I had endured enemy fire, the loss of Marines under my command, the weight of decisions that carried life and death consequences. I wasn't going to be defeated by the cruelty of people who shared my DNA but had never shared my values. I would go to the service. Not because they welcomed me, but because I had every right to be there. Friday morning arrived gray and humid, typical Connecticut summer weather that made everything feel heavy and oppressive. I dressed in my service uniform, the same dress blues I had worn to receive my stars, the ribbons and decorations representing 2 decades of service arranged in precise rows across my chest. Looking in the hotel mirror, I saw a woman I was proud of. Someone who had earned respect through action, who had led by example, who had sacrificed comfort for duty. If my family couldn't see that, if they chose to focus only on their narrow definition of success, that was their failing, not mine. I arrived at Riverside Memorial Chapel 20 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. The parking lot was filled with luxury cars, Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses, the vehicles of my parents' social circle. Through the large windows of the chapel, I could see people milling about in their dark suits and elegant dresses, air-kissing and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. I walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking on the pavement, my spine straight, my head high. Marcus saw me first. He was standing near the entrance, greeting arrivals with the practiced charm he had inherited from our father. When he spotted me approaching, his expression shifted from welcoming to alarmed. He stepped directly into my path. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for Dad's memorial service, Marcus, same as everyone else." "Mom specifically said you weren't coming. You can't just show up like this. I can, and I did. Now please step aside. But instead of moving, he crossed his arms and planted himself more firmly in front of the entrance. You're not welcome here. This is a private service for people who actually cared about Dad, not people who abandoned him for some misguided sense of patriotic duty. The insult was calculated and cruel, designed to make me react, to give them justification for their treatment. But I had been trained to maintain composure under pressure far more intense than this. Move aside, Marcus. Or what? You'll have me court-martialed? He laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. This isn't one of your military operations, Sarah. This is a family gathering, and you're not family anymore. Other people were starting to notice the confrontation. I could see heads turning, whispered conversations beginning. My mother appeared in the doorway behind Marcus, her face pale but her expression resolute. Sarah, she said loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear, I thought I made it clear that your presence here would be inappropriate. Inappropriate? The word came out harder than I intended. Attending my own father's memorial service is inappropriate? You forfeited your right to call him your father when you chose to abandon this family, Charlotte's voice cut through the air. She had materialized beside our mother, dressed in an elegant black dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. You can't just waltz back in here after decades of absence and expect us to pretend you belong. A small crowd had gathered now, watching the drama unfold like spectators at a car accident. I recognized some of the faces, family friends, business associates, people who had known me as a child, but who now looked at me with curiosity and judgment. I served my country, I said quietly, my voice carrying despite its low volume. I devoted my life to protecting people like all of you. That's not abandonment. That's a sacrifice. Sacrifice? Marcus laughed again, louder this time. You sacrificed us for your ego. You chose violence over family. You chose strangers over your own blood. The accusation was so far from the truth, so fundamentally misunderstanding of everything I had done and been, that for a moment I was speechless. You know nothing about what I chose or why I chose it, I finally said. We know enough, my mother replied. We know you preferred playing soldier to being a daughter. We know you cared more about your career than your family. And we know that Robert died disappointed in the daughter who never came home. That last sentence was designed to destroy me, and for a moment, it almost worked. The cruelty of it, the calculated nature of the attack, made my breath catch in my throat. But then something else took over. Not anger, not hurt, but a cold, clear certainty. I'm going to walk into that chapel, I said quietly, and I'm going to pay my respects to my father. You can make a scene if you want, but you're not going to stop me. I took a step forward. Marcus didn't move. Security, my mother called out. And that's when I realized just how far they were willing to go to erase me from their lives. 2 men in dark suits approached from either side of the entrance. Private security, hired to keep me away from my own father's memorial service. As they moved toward me, I stood perfectly still, my hands at my sides, my face calm. I had faced down enemy combatants with more respect than my own family was showing me. Ma'am, one of the security guards said, his voice professionally polite, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. I looked past him to the faces of my family, my mother's cold satisfaction, Marcus's smug triumph, Charlotte's embarrassed discomfort. Beyond them, I could see the gathered mourners, watching this family drama play out like entertainment. This is my father's memorial service, I said to the security guard. I understand, ma'am, but this is private property, and you've been asked to leave by the family. The finality of it settled over me like ice water. They had actually done it. They had hired security to keep me away from saying goodbye to my father. I nodded once to the security guard. I understand. I turned and walked back toward my car, my footsteps steady, my head high. Behind me, I could hear the resumption of conversation, the crowd dispersing now that the show was over. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot, watching through the windshield as the last stragglers entered the chapel. In a few minutes, they would begin celebrating my father's life, sharing memories and stories that would carefully edit out any mention of the daughter who had served her country with distinction. But I wasn't leaving, not yet. Because I knew something they didn't know, something that would change everything. The envelope had arrived at my quarters 3 weeks before my father died. It came through official military channels, which was unusual for personal correspondence. My aide, Captain Torres, had placed it on my desk with the day's briefing materials, and I almost missed it among the operational reports and administrative documents. The return address read, Whitman and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Hartford, Connecticut. The law firm that had handled my family's legal affairs for as long as I could remember. Inside was a letter from Theodore Whitman Sr., my father's longtime attorney, along with a sealed envelope marked in my father's unmistakable handwriting. For Major General Sarah Reynolds, to be opened only upon my death. Quote, the cover letter from Mr. Whitman was brief and formal. Major General Reynolds, your father has instructed me to forward this sealed correspondence to you in the event of his passing. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience following his death to discuss matters pertaining to his estate. I had stared at that sealed envelope for nearly an hour before placing it in my personal safe. My father had never written me a letter in his life. Our entire adult relationship consisted of brief, stilted phone calls on major holidays, and the occasional formal card acknowledging my promotions. Cards that felt more like business correspondence than family communication. Now, sitting in the parking lot of Riverside Memorial Chapel, watching my own family celebrate his life without me, I remembered that envelope. I had carried it with me to Connecticut, though I wasn't sure why. The memorial service lasted exactly 90 minutes. I watched through the chapel windows as people filed out, embracing my mother and siblings, offering condolences and sharing what appeared to be fond memories. The whole scene had the polished quality of a well-rehearsed performance, everyone playing their assigned roles in the theater of grief. Marcus stood at the entrance, shaking hands and accepting sympathy with the practiced ease of someone who had spent his life networking. Charlotte clung to our mother's arm, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief that matched her dress perfectly. My mother moved through the crowd with regal composure, graciously accepting the condolences of Greenwich's social elite. They had created a beautiful memorial for a beloved patriarch, complete with photo displays, elegant flower arrangements, and what I could see were military honors acknowledging my father's brief service in the National Guard during the 1970s. Everything was tasteful, appropriate, and completely sanitized of any complications or contradictions, including me. As the crowd began to disperse, I started my car and drove to the only place I could think of where I might find some peace, the old cemetery where my grandparents were buried. It was a small, historic graveyard about 10 miles from Greenwich, where generations of my father's family had been laid to rest. I parked beneath a massive oak tree and walked among the weathered headstones until I found the familiar gray granite marker, Robert James Reynolds Sr. and Eleanor Marie Reynolds, my paternal grandparents who had died when I was in college, long before the family rift had become irreparable. I sat on the stone bench beside their grave and finally opened my father's letter. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written during his final illness, but the words were unmistakably his. Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I hope to God that Patricia had the decency to inform you of my death. Knowing your mother, she probably tried to keep you away from the funeral. She has never understood you, and I'm ashamed to say that I let her convince me that her way was the right way for far too many years. I want you to know that I kept every news clip about your promotions, every photograph of you in uniform that I could find, every article that mentioned your service. They are in a box in my study, along with copies of your commendation letters that somehow found their way to my desk over the years. You may wonder how I got them. I had friends in Washington who made sure I stayed informed about my daughter's remarkable career. I was proud of you, Sarah. I was always proud of you. But I was also a coward who chose social peace over paternal courage. Your mother made it clear from the beginning that supporting your military aspirations would mean choosing between you and the rest of the family. I chose the path of least resistance, and I have regretted it every day since. You deserve to know the truth about why they resent you so much. It isn't really about your career choice, though they've convinced themselves it is. It's about money. When your great-grandfather died, he left a substantial trust fund that was to be divided equally among his great-grandchildren when the youngest turned 35. That fund is now worth approximately $4.2 million. Marcus and Charlotte have been counting on their shares to maintain their lifestyles and finance their various endeavors. Your share, which has been growing untouched for 15 years, represents money they see as rightfully theirs since you abandoned the family. They have been pressuring me for years to have you declared legally estranged so that your portion could be redistributed. Your mother has suggested multiple times that we could contest your eligibility based on your prolonged absence from family affairs. I have refused every time, but I know they will move quickly after my death to try to claim what is yours. Do not let them steal from you, Sarah. You have sacrificed enough for this family's comfort. There is something else you need to know. I am not being buried in Greenwich, despite what they may tell people. I purchased a plot at Arlington National Cemetery, and my body is to be interred there with full military honors next Friday at 1,400 hours. Whitman has the documentation, including the special permission I received, based on my National Guard service, and my relationship to a distinguished active duty officer, you. I wanted my final resting place to be somewhere that would honor the daughter I was too weak to support in life. If you choose to attend, and I hope you will find an honor guard waiting. I made very specific arrangements. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know that my cowardice caused you pain that no apology can undo. But I want you to know that your old father spent his final years learning what real courage looks like by watching his daughter from afar. You became everything I was too afraid to be. With love and profound regret, your father. I read the letter 3 times before the full impact hit me. My father had been secretly following my career for decades. He had kept a record of my achievements that my family never saw. Most importantly, he had protected my inheritance and planned his own burial to honor me rather than appease them. But there was more. The letter mentioned documents with Whitman that I needed to see. I drove directly to the law offices of Whitman and Associates, a stately brick building in downtown Hartford that looked like it had been there since the Constitution was signed. Theodore Whitman, Jr. met me in his father's old office, surrounded by leather-bound books and portraits of distinguished lawyers. Major General Reynolds, he said, rising from behind a massive mahogany desk. First, please accept my condolences on your father's passing. He spoke of you often, and with great pride. Thank you, Mr. Whitman. I received his letter, and I believe you have additional documents for me? He nodded gravely and opened a thick file folder. Your father was very thorough. He anticipated that there might be complications regarding his estate, particularly concerning your family's reaction to certain provisions. He handed me a certified copy of my father's will, updated just 6 months before his death. As I read through the legal language, the scope of his final decisions became clear. He had left the family home and business to Marcus and Charlotte, along with substantial cash bequests. My mother received a generous lifetime annuity and the vacation properties, but there were specific provisions that would shock them. First, my trust fund was not only protected, but enhanced. My father had added an additional $2 million from his personal estate, along with a portfolio of blue-chip stocks that had been quietly accumulating dividends for years. The total value of my inheritance was approaching $7 million. Second, he had established a charitable foundation in my name focused on supporting military families and veterans' education. He had funded it with $5 million and named me as the sole director. Third, and most importantly, he had included a detailed letter to be read at the official reading of the will, which was scheduled for the following Monday. In that letter, he would publicly acknowledge his pride in my military service and his regret for not supporting me sooner. Your stepmother and siblings are expecting a traditional reading on Monday at 2 p.m., Mr. Whitman explained. They have no idea about these provisions. Your father specifically requested that you be present for that meeting. But that wasn't all. Mr. Whitman opened another folder and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Your father also left instructions regarding his burial. As you know from his letter, he will be interred at Arlington next Friday. However, he made one additional arrangement that he wanted to keep secret until after the Greenwich Memorial Service. He handed me a formal document with military letterhead. It was a request for full honors burial, approved by the Department of Defense and signed by several high-ranking officials. Your father's brief National Guard service normally wouldn't qualify him for Arlington burial, but his relationship to you, combined with a special provision for family members of distinguished officers, made it possible. However, he requested something unusual. Mr. Whitman paused, as if weighing his words carefully. He specifically requested that you be recognized at the ceremony in your official capacity. He wanted the honor guard to acknowledge your rank and service as part of the proceedings. Essentially, Major General, he arranged for you to be the primary military representative at his burial. The implications were staggering. While my family was performing their carefully scripted memorial for Greenwich Society, my father would be receiving a military burial that honored both his service and mine. And I would be there not as the rejected daughter, but as a Major General in the United States Marine Corps. There's one more thing, Mr. Whitman said quietly. He pulled out a small wooden box and set it on the desk. Inside, nested in blue velvet, was my father's National Guard Service Medal, along with a newer decoration I didn't recognize. He received this last month, Mr. Whitman explained, pointing to the unfamiliar medal. It's a special recognition for family sacrifice in service to the nation. Apparently, it's awarded to family members of career military officers who have demonstrated exceptional dedication despite personal cost. Your father applied for it specifically so that he could be buried wearing recognition of your achievements. I sat in that leather chair, surrounded by the weight of legal documents and family secrets, trying to process the magnitude of what my father had orchestrated. For years, I had believed he was indifferent to my service, ashamed of my choices, disappointed in the daughter who had chosen duty over family expectations. Instead, he had been quietly building a legacy that honored everything I had worked for, while protecting me from the family that had never understood my value. The game was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. Mr. Whitman, I said finally, I'll see you Monday at 2 p.m., and I'll be at Arlington on Friday in full dress uniform. Your father would be very pleased, Major General, very pleased indeed. As I left the law office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The sense that someone in my family had finally seen me for who I really was. And more than that, they had been proud of what they saw. The real battle was just beginning. The weekend between my father's memorial and the will reading felt like the calm before a hurricane. I remained in Connecticut, staying at a different hotel, the Marriott downtown, far from the social circles where word of my presence might reach my family. I needed these few days to prepare for what was coming, and more importantly, to process the seismic shift in everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my father. Saturday morning, I drove to the public library in Hartford and spent hours researching the legal precedents surrounding family trusts and inheritance disputes. My father's letter had made it clear that Marcus and Charlotte had been pressuring him to declare me legally estranged, and I wanted to understand exactly what they might try to pull once they learned about my inheritance. What I discovered was disturbing. In Connecticut, there were several legal mechanisms that could potentially be used to challenge an heir's right to inherited property, particularly if the heir could be characterized as having abandoned family responsibilities. The fact that I had been geographically distant for military service could be twisted by aggressive attorneys into evidence of estrangement. But my father had been thorough. The update will include specific language addressing my military service as a form of family honor rather than abandonment. He had also included sworn affidavits from colleagues and neighbors testifying to his pride in my achievements and his regular communication with me. Even more cleverly, he had documented every instance where my family had rejected my attempts at contact, creating a paper trail that showed any estrangement was their choice, not mine. Sunday, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove back to Greenwich and parked across the street from my childhood home. The house looked exactly the same. Pristine white colonial with black shutters, carefully manicured lawn, flower beds that probably required a full-time gardener to maintain. Through the large windows, I could see signs of activity. Cars in the driveway indicated that Marcus and Charlotte were both there, likely with their spouses, probably planning how they would handle my father's estate. As I sat watching, I saw Charlotte's husband, David, carrying boxes from the house to a white SUV. Even from a distance, I could tell they were moving things out. Probably clearing my father's study, perhaps removing anything that might complicate their version of family history. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Major General Reynolds, This is Captain Lisa Chen from Arlington National Cemetery. Confirming your attendance at Friday 1400 burial service for Robert Reynolds. Honor Guard briefing at 13:30. Please confirm. I typed back quickly. Confirmed. Major General Reynolds is attending. Quote. Another message followed. Ma'am, special request from the family. Will you be available for a private ceremony at 1500 following the burial? The Honor Guard has prepared something unusual per the deceased's instructions. My father had arranged something beyond the burial itself. Something he wanted to keep secret until the moment it happened. Confirmed, I replied. Monday morning arrived gray and humid. Typical Connecticut summer weather that made everything feel heavy and oppressive. I dressed carefully in my civilian clothes, a sharp navy business suit that projected authority without the drama of my military uniform. Today wasn't about intimidation, it was about quiet strength. The offices of Whitman and Associates felt different this time. The waiting area was filled with familiar faces when I arrived at 1:45 p.m. Marcus sat in a leather chair near the window, checking his phone with the impatient air of someone who had better places to be. Charlotte perched on the edge of her seat, nervously adjusting her jewelry. My mother sat with perfect posture in the center chair, wearing the black Chanel suit she reserved for important occasions. They saw me the moment I walked through the door. Marcus looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from boredom to alarm. What the hell is she doing here? Charlotte's eyes widened. Mother, did you know about this? My mother's face went white, then red, then settled into a mask of controlled fury. Sarah, this is a private family matter. You have no business being here. Actually, came a voice from behind me, Major General Reynolds has every business being here. Theodore Whitman Jr. had emerged from his office, carrying a thick file folder and wearing the expression of someone who was about to deliver news that would change everything. Please, everyone, come into the conference room. We have a great deal to discuss. The conference room was dominated by a massive oak table that looked like it had witnessed decades of family drama. We took our seats with the careful spacing of people preparing for battle. My family clustered at one end of the table while I sat alone on the opposite side. Mr. Whitman positioned himself at the head, opening his folder with deliberate ceremony. Before we begin with the formal reading of the will, he said, I want to address the elephant in the room. Mrs. Reynolds, you expressed surprise at Major General Reynolds' presence here today. I want to be clear that she is not only invited to this reading, she is required to be here by explicit instruction from your late husband. My mother's composure cracked slightly. Robert never mentioned anything about Sarah being involved in his estate matters. With respect, Mrs. Reynolds, there were many things about your husband's final arrangements that he chose to keep private until after his death. Today, those arrangements become public. Mr. Whitman opened the will to the first page and began reading in the formal, measured tone that lawyers use for such occasions. The initial provisions were exactly what my family expected. The house to Marcus, the business interests to Charlotte, generous financial provisions for my mother. I watched their faces relax as each familiar bequest was announced. Marcus actually smiled. Charlotte squeezed her husband's hand. My mother nodded approvingly, as if my father's final wishes had met with her satisfaction. Then Mr. Whitman reached the section they hadn't expected. To my daughter, Major General Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds, United States Marine Corps, I leave the following assets in recognition of her exemplary service to our nation, and in apology for my failure to support her chosen path during my lifetime. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. First, the full balance of the Reynolds Family Trust, established by my grandfather in 1952, currently valued at approximately $4.2 million, along with all accrued interest and dividends. Marcus's face went ashen. Charlotte's mouth fell open. Second, an additional request for my personal estate in the amount of $2 million, along with the complete portfolio of Henderson Industries stock, currently valued at approximately $800,000. This is impossible, Marcus said, his voice barely controlled. Dad would never. Mr. Whitman held up his hand. Please allow me to finish. Third, I hereby establish the Sarah Reynolds Foundation for Military Families, funded with an initial endowment of $5 million from my estate, with Major General Reynolds as sole director and beneficiary of any operational surplus. Charlotte actually gasped. The math was becoming clear to all of them. My inheritance totaled nearly $12 million, while their combined inheritance was less than $3 million. But Mr. Whitman wasn't finished. Finally, I want to address certain family members who may question these provisions or attempt to challenge my daughter's fitness to receive them. Quote. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked Personal Statement. Your husband specifically requested that this letter be read aloud to the entire family. My mother looked like she was about to be sick. Mr. Whitman opened the envelope and began to read my father's final words to his family. To my wife Patricia, my son Marcus, and my daughter Charlotte, if you are hearing this letter, it means you are likely shocked by the provisions I have made for Sarah. Let me be absolutely clear about my reasoning. For 20 years, you convinced me that supporting Sarah's military career would somehow diminish our family's standing in the community. You made me choose between social acceptance and paternal pride, and I chose poorly. I allowed you to erase my daughter from our family narrative while she served our country with distinction. Sarah never abandoned this family, you abandoned her. She wrote letters that went unanswered. She called on holidays and received cold, brief responses. She sent news of her achievements and received indifference in return. When she was wounded in combat, you sent a card. When she was promoted to general officer, you didn't even acknowledge it. Meanwhile, Marcus, your business ventures have failed repeatedly, costing the family significant money that I covered quietly to protect your reputation. Charlotte, your art gallery has been subsidized by family funds for 8 years without turning a profit. Neither of you has demonstrated the responsibility or character that would justify managing significant inherited wealth. Sarah, conversely, has demonstrated leadership, courage, and integrity in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. She has earned the respect of her peers, the loyalty of her subordinates, and the recognition of her nation. She represents the best of what our family name could mean. I am redistributing the family wealth to reflect family value, not family proximity. Sarah has earned what I am giving her through sacrifice and service. You have not. If you choose to contest these provisions, you will find that I have been very thorough in documenting the reasoning behind every decision. You will also find that any such contest will result in the public disclosure of certain financial irregularities in the family business that have been overlooked for the sake of family harmony. I suggest you use this opportunity to reflect on what kind of people you want to be going forward. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Marcus stared at the table, his hands clenched into fists. Charlotte was crying, but whether from grief or anger I couldn't tell. Mr. Whitman carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The will is irrevocable and has been thoroughly reviewed for any potential legal challenges. All assets transfer immediately, and the foundation paperwork has already been filed with the state of Connecticut. I had listened to the entire reading without speaking, letting the weight of my father's final judgment settle over the room like a heavy blanket. Finally, I spoke. I want you all to know that I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know it was coming, but I'm not going to refuse it either. Marcus looked up, his eyes filled with a hatred I had never seen before. You orchestrated this somehow. You manipulated him. I haven't spoken to our father in over 2 years, Marcus. The last time we talked was when I called to tell him about my promotion to Major General. He congratulated me politely and asked how the weather was in North Carolina. That was the extent of our manipulation. This is wrong, Charlotte said through her tears. This isn't what he would have wanted if he had been thinking clearly. Actually, Mr. Whitman interjected, your father updated this will 6 months ago after extensive consultation with both medical and legal professionals. He was thoroughly evaluated for mental competency as part of the process. There is no question about his clarity of mind. My mother finally spoke, her voice like ice. You may have stolen our inheritance, Sarah, but you'll never be part of this family. Money doesn't change what you are. I stood up slowly, gathering my copy of the will in my purse. You're right, Mother. Money doesn't change what I am. I'm still the daughter who served her country with honor, while you worried about what the neighbors would think. I'm still the woman who saved lives while you planned charity galas. I'm still the person who chose duty over comfort, while you chose appearances over truth. I paused at the door. The difference is, now I have the means to honor Dad's memory in a way that would have made him proud, and I intend to do exactly that. As I left the conference room, I could hear the explosion of angry voices behind me. 20 years of resentment and entitlement finally boiling over into open fury. But I was already thinking ahead to Friday, to Arlington, to the moment when the honor guard would salute, and my father's final gift would be complete. The real reckoning was still to come. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear in Washington, D.C. I had driven down from Connecticut the night before, staying at a hotel near Arlington National Cemetery. The contrast between the chaos of Monday's will reading and the solemn quiet of preparing for my father's military burial felt surreal, like stepping between two different worlds. I woke at 05:00, automatically following the routine that had governed my life for over 2 decades. Physical training, shower, breakfast, mental preparation. But today felt different. Today, I wasn't just Major General Sarah Reynolds attending a burial. I was a daughter finally able to honor her father in the way he had secretly wanted all along. My dress blue uniform hung perfectly pressed in the hotel closet. Every ribbon was precisely placed, every brass button polished to a mirror shine. The 2 stars on my shoulders caught the morning light as I dressed, reminding me that this rank had been earned through years of service that my father had been quietly celebrating, while my family dismissed it as embarrassing. At 1,300 hours, I drove through the gates of Arlington National Cemetery. The guard at the entrance saluted when he saw my rank, a gesture of respect that never failed to remind me why I had chosen this life. The roads through Arlington wind between thousands of white headstones, each marking a life given in service to something greater than self. I parked at the administration building and was met by Captain Lisa Chen, a sharp young officer who served as the cemetery's liaison for special ceremonies. "Major General Reynolds," she said, saluting crisply. "Welcome to Arlington. I want to brief you on today's proceedings before we join the honor guard." She led me into a small conference room where detailed plans for the burial were laid out on a table. What I saw there took my breath away. "Ma'am, your father's burial has been designated as a special honors ceremony. Normally, his brief National Guard service would qualify him for military burial with a standard honor guard. However, the combination of his service record and his relationship to you has resulted in some unusual arrangements." She pointed to a diagram showing the positioning of the honor guard. "We have a 12-man Marine honor guard, specifically requested for your father's service. Additionally, General Morrison from Marine Corps Headquarters will be present to represent the Commandant. The ceremony will include full military honors, flag folding, rifle salute, and the presentation of colors." I studied the arrangements, noting details that went far beyond what would normally be provided for someone with my father's service record. "Captain Chen, this level of ceremony seems extraordinary for the circumstances." She smiled. "Ma'am, your father made very specific arrangements, months before his death. He worked directly with the Defense Department to ensure this ceremony would honor not just his service, but yours. In his application, he specifically requested that his burial serve as recognition of your family's sacrifice for military service." The implications were staggering. My father hadn't just planned his burial, he had orchestrated it as a public recognition of my career. "There's something else, ma'am. We've had some unusual requests for attendance today." "What kind of requests?" "Media, for one. Apparently, word has gotten out that a distinguished female general officer is burying her father at Arlington. There are requests from military publications, local news, even some national outlets. We've declined all media access, per your father's instructions, but there will likely be photographers at the public areas of the cemetery." I felt a chill of realization. My father had arranged this ceremony knowing it would attract attention, knowing it would be impossible for my family to ignore or dismiss. "Ma'am, there's one more thing. We've received inquiries from several high-ranking officers who wish to attend the ceremony. Apparently, your father reached out to colleagues in the military community before his death, informing them of the service and specifically inviting them to honor your family's sacrifice." "How many officers are we talking about, Captain?" She consulted her notes. "As of this morning, we have confirmation from 2 other general officers, 4 colonels, and approximately 20 other personnel who served with you at various points in your career. Your father apparently had quite a network of contacts in the military community. The scope of what my father had planned was becoming clear. This wasn't just a burial. It was a military tribute designed to publicly honor everything my family had spent decades dismissing. Captain Chen, has my family been notified of these arrangements? No, ma'am. Your father's instructions were very specific. The civilian family was to be informed only of the basic burial time and location. All special arrangements were to remain confidential until the ceremony itself. At 13:30, I joined the honor guard for the pre-ceremony briefing. The 12 Marines stood in perfect formation, their dress blues immaculate, their bearing reflecting the precision that had made the Corps legendary. The senior sergeant, a veteran with ribbons indicating multiple combat deployments, stepped forward. Major General Reynolds, the honor guard is ready for your father's service. We understand this is a special ceremony recognizing both his service and yours. We are honored to participate. I looked at these Marines, men and women who had volunteered to spend their Friday honoring a man they had never met because he was the father of a fellow Marine. The brotherhood of service extended beyond death, beyond family drama, beyond the petty concerns that had consumed so much of my civilian life. Sergeant, I want you to know that my father would be deeply honored by your presence here today. Thank you for representing the Corps. Ma'am, we represent each other. That's what Marines do. At 1400 hours precisely, the ceremony began. I had expected my family to attend, despite everything that had happened. What I hadn't expected was the crowd that had gathered around the burial site. My mother, Marcus, and Charlotte stood together near the back of the assembled group, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion and discomfort. They had clearly expected a simple, quiet burial. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by uniformed military personnel, including several officers whose rank and decorations made it clear they were not ordinary attendees. General Morrison, a distinguished African-American officer whose chest was covered with ribbons from 3 decades of service, stood with the family representatives. I recognized Colonel Patricia Hayes, who had been my commanding officer in Afghanistan, and Major General Robert Kim, who had served as my mentor during my early years as a field-grade officer. But the most surprising presence was General James Mitchell, the current Commandant of the Marine Corps, who had flown in specifically for this ceremony. As the honor guard carried my father's casket to the gravesite, I walked behind it in formation with the other general officers. The symbolism was unmistakable. My father was being escorted to his final rest by the military leadership he had secretly supported for decades. The burial service itself was flawless. The chaplain spoke about service, sacrifice, and the bonds between those who serve and those who support them. The rifle salute echoed across the cemetery with crisp precision. When the honor guard began folding the flag that had covered my father's casket, I felt tears threatening for the first time since his death. General Morrison approached my family to present the folded flag, but instead of handing it to my mother, as would be traditional, he turned to me. Major General Reynolds, he said in a voice that carried across the assembled crowd, on behalf of the President of the United States, the Department of Defense, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag in recognition of your father's service and your family's sacrifice for our country. The silence that followed was profound. Every person at that gravesite understood the significance of what had just happened. My father's final arrangements had positioned me not as the estranged daughter, but as the honored representative of a military family. My mother's face had gone white. Marcus looked like he had been struck. Charlotte was staring at the assembled officers with a dawning comprehension of just how wrong they had been about my place in the world. But the ceremony wasn't over. General Mitchell stepped forward, his aide carrying a small wooden box. Major General Reynolds, your father requested that this ceremony include a special recognition. In his communications with our office, he expressed his pride in your service and his desire to publicly acknowledge the sacrifices you have made for our nation. He opened the box to reveal a medal I had never seen before. This is the Distinguished Service Cross for Exceptional Family Sacrifice, a rarely awarded decoration that recognizes family members whose support of military service exemplifies the highest traditions of American patriotism. Your father nominated you for this award, providing extensive documentation of your career and his pride in your achievements. The crowd had grown during the ceremony. Other visitors to Arlington had stopped to watch, drawn by the unusual sight of such a high-level military gathering. Military personnel from throughout the D.C. area had somehow learned of the ceremony and come to pay their respects. As General Mitchell pinned the medal to my uniform, I heard something I hadn't heard in 20 years. Applause. Not polite, social applause, but the genuine recognition of people who understood what this moment represented. When I turned to face the crowd, I saw my family standing frozen in place, surrounded by a sea of military uniforms and respectful civilians. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing me through the eyes of people who understood the value of service, people who recognized leadership, people who knew the difference between real achievement and social posturing. Colonel Hayes approached me as the formal ceremony concluded. "Sarah," she said quietly, "your father reached out to many of us over the past few months. He wanted us to be here not just to honor him, but to show you that your military family recognizes what your biological family never did." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, officers I had served with, Marines I had led, colleagues who had watched my career with respect and admiration. These people knew my worth, because they had seen it demonstrated under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. My civilian family had finally seen me as others saw me, not as an embarrassment or a disappointment, but as a leader, a warrior, a woman who had earned her place among the nation's most respected military officers. The transformation in their expressions was complete. The dismissive arrogance was gone, replaced by something between awe and shame. My father's final gift was complete. He had given me not just financial independence, but public recognition of everything I had achieved despite their rejection. But there was still one more surprise waiting. The reception following the burial was held at the Officers Club at Marine Barracks, Washington, a venue my father had specifically reserved for what he called the final gathering. I learned this detail from General Mitchell as we walked from the gravesite, the weight of the newly pinned medal on my chest, serving as a constant reminder of how completely this day had exceeded my expectations. "Your father was very specific about the guest list for this reception," General Mitchell explained as our military convoy made its way through D.C. traffic. "He wanted your civilian family to have the opportunity to meet the people who have worked alongside you throughout your career." I glanced back at the black sedan carrying my mother, Marcus, and Charlotte. Through the rear window, I could see them sitting in stunned silence, still processing what they had witnessed at Arlington. The casual dismissal they had shown me for 2 decades had been replaced by something between shock and dawning comprehension. The Officers Club was one of the most prestigious military venues in the nation's capital, a place where only the highest-ranking personnel and most distinguished guests were invited. As our cars pulled up to the entrance, I could see that my father had indeed been thorough in his planning. Military personnel in dress uniforms were arriving from multiple directions, creating an atmosphere of formality and respect that left no doubt about the significance of the gathering. Inside, the club's main reception hall had been transformed into a memorial celebration that bore no resemblance to the stiff social gathering my family had orchestrated in Greenwich. Instead of flower arrangements and polite conversation, the room buzzed with the energy of military professionals, sharing stories of service and sacrifice. Captain Chen approached me with a guest book that she explained had been my father's final request. "Ma'am, your father asked that everyone in attendance today sign this book with a personal message about your service. He wanted to create a permanent record of how your colleagues view your contributions to the Corps and the nation." As I flipped through the pages, I saw entries from officers spanning my entire career. Lieutenant Colonel James Park, who had served under my command in Helmand Province. General Reynolds exemplifies everything the Marine Corps stands for: courage, honor, and absolute dedication to her Marines. Colonel Maria Santos, my peer from the Pentagon. Sarah Reynolds is the finest officer I have ever had the privilege to work alongside. Major General David Wright, who had been my instructor at the War College. General Reynolds represents the future of military leadership in America. Page after page of testimonials from people who had seen me at my best and worst, who had trusted me with their lives and the lives of their subordinates, who knew the weight of the decisions I had made and the integrity with which I had made them. My family stood near the entrance to the reception hall, clearly unsure of how to navigate this unfamiliar environment. They were accustomed to social gatherings, where their wealth and connections provided automatic status. Here, surrounded by military officers whose ranks and decorations spoke to achievements they couldn't understand, they looked lost. Colonel Hayes approached them first, her manner courteous but direct. "Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Reynolds, Miss Reynolds," she said, extending her hand to each of them in turn. "I'm Colonel Patricia Hayes. I had the honor of serving under your daughter's command in Afghanistan. I wanted to express my condolences on your loss, and to tell you how much your father's pride in Sarah meant to all of us who served with her." My mother managed a polite smile, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. "Thank you, Colonel. We appreciate your service." The awkwardness of her response was apparent to everyone within earshot. She had no framework for understanding what Colonel Hayes represented, no vocabulary for acknowledging the bonds forged in combat. Marcus, attempting to assert some form of social dominance, extended his hand to Colonel Hayes with the confident gesture he used in business meetings. "Marcus Reynolds," he said. "I run Reynolds Development Corporation. Perhaps you've heard of our work in commercial real estate." Colonel Hayes shook his hand politely, but her expression remained neutral. "I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the company, Mr. Reynolds. I've spent most of the last decade deployed overseas." The implicit criticism in her response, that while he had been building shopping centers, she had been defending the nation, was lost on Marcus, but not on the other officers who had overheard the exchange. Charlotte, perhaps sensing the undercurrent of tension, tried a different approach. "This is all quite impressive," she said, gesturing around the room. "We had no idea Sarah was so well known in military circles." "Ma'am," Colonel Hayes replied, "your sister is one of the most respected general officers in the Marine Corps. Her leadership in combat operations has saved countless lives. Her strategic thinking has influenced military doctrine at the highest levels. She is well known because she has earned that recognition through extraordinary service." The words hung in the air like an indictment. "For 20 years, my family had dismissed my career as an embarrassing departure from their social expectations. Now they were being confronted with the reality that I had achieved a level of professional distinction that far exceeded anything they had accomplished in their comfortable insular world." General Morrison joined our group, his presence adding even more weight to the conversation. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting," he said, "but I wanted to share something with Sarah's family." He turned to my mother. "Mrs. Reynolds, your daughter led one of the most successful counterinsurgency operations in the history of the Afghan conflict. Her tactical innovations are now taught at the Command and Staff College. More importantly, the Marines under her command had the lowest casualty rate of any comparable unit during that deployment." My mother's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. We didn't know. Sarah never talked about her work when she called home." "Ma'am," General Morrison said gently, "classified operations can't be discussed with civilian family members. Your daughter carried the weight of life and death decisions alone, without the comfort of being able to share those burdens with the people closest to her." The implication was clear and devastating. While they had been criticizing me for my absence from family gatherings, I had been making decisions that affected the lives of hundreds of Marines, decisions I couldn't discuss with anyone outside the military community. Marcus, perhaps finally grasping the magnitude of what he was hearing, asked the question that revealed just how completely they had misunderstood my life. "Are you saying Sarah is important? In the military, I mean?" General Morrison's expression shifted to something between surprise and pity. "Mr. Reynolds, your sister is one of the youngest officers ever promoted to Major General in the Marine Corps. She commands a division of over 15,000 Marines. She has been consulted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff on matters of national security. There are fewer than 30 women in the entire United States military who hold her rank or higher." The silence that followed was deafening. My family stood frozen, finally comprehending that the daughter and sister they had dismissed as an embarrassment was actually one of the most accomplished women in the country. Captain Chen approached with another surprise. "Major General Reynolds, there's someone here who wants to meet your family." She gestured toward the entrance, where a distinguished older woman in a dark suit was being escorted by 2 Marines. Even from across the room, I recognized her immediately. That's Secretary of Defense Linda Harrison, I whispered to Captain Chen. Yes, ma'am. She specifically requested to attend today, after learning about your father's arrangements. She wanted to personally express her condolences and to meet the family of one of our most valued general officers. Secretary Harrison approached our group with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention at the highest levels of government. My family instinctively straightened, recognizing authority even if they didn't fully understand its source. Major General Reynolds, Secretary Harrison said, extending her hand, please accept my deepest condolences on your father's passing. From everything I've heard, he was a man who understood the true meaning of patriotism. She turned to my family. You must be very proud of Sarah's achievements. Her service record is truly exceptional. My mother managed to find her voice. Thank you, Madam Secretary. We're learning quite a lot about Sarah's career today. Secretary Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly at this admission. Learning about it? Forgive me, but Major General Reynolds has been one of our most distinguished officers for over a decade. Her innovations in counterinsurgency warfare have been adopted by NATO forces worldwide. She's been featured in professional military journals and has briefed Congress on multiple occasions. The revelation that I had been significant enough to brief Congress, that I had been speaking to senators and representatives while my family couldn't be bothered to return my phone calls, landed like a physical blow. Charlotte, perhaps desperate to salvage some dignity from the situation, attempted to explain. We've been very busy with our own careers. Sarah was always so independent, and we assumed she would tell us if anything important happened. Secretary Harrison's expression grew cold. Ma'am, Major General Reynolds was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor in Combat 3 years ago. She received the Legion of Merit twice. Last year, she was selected for promotion ahead of several hundred other qualified officers. These achievements were covered in military publications and official announcements. Quote, she paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The fact that her family was unaware of these honors reflects a level of disconnection that I find troubling. The condemnation in her voice was unmistakable. Here was one of the most powerful women in the American government expressing disapproval of how my family had treated me. Marcus, finally grasping the magnitude of their mistake, attempted damage control. Secretary Harrison, there have been some misunderstandings in our family. We've always supported Sarah's service, but perhaps we could have been more engaged. Mr. Reynolds, Secretary Harrison replied, support is not passive. It requires effort, attention, and genuine interest in someone's achievements. Your sister has spent 2 decades serving our nation with distinction, while apparently receiving little recognition from the people who should have been most proud of her accomplishments. She turned back to me. General Reynolds, your father's arrangements today have been extraordinary. He clearly understood what your family is only beginning to grasp, that you represent the very best of American military leadership. As Secretary Harrison moved on to speak with other guests, my family stood in stunned silence. The comfortable narrative they had constructed about my life, that I was an embarrassment who had chosen an inappropriate career, had been completely demolished by people whose authority they couldn't question. The reckoning my father had orchestrated was complete. They could no longer dismiss me, ignore me, or pretend that my achievements were insignificant. They had been forced to confront the reality that I had built a life of genuine consequence while they had focused on appearances and social status. But there was still one final revelation waiting, one that would change everything forever. As the reception began to wind down, Captain Chen approached me with an envelope bearing the official seal of the Marine Corps Commandant. Ma'am, General Mitchell asked me to give this to you before you leave. He said it contains something your father specifically requested be delivered to you today, after all other ceremonies were complete. I opened the envelope to find another letter in my father's handwriting, along with a small brass key and an address in Washington, D.C. that I didn't recognize. The letter was brief. Sarah, there is one final gift I arranged for you. The address enclosed is a property I purchased 6 months ago under a trust fund. Captain Chen has been instructed to escort you there when you're ready. Inside, you will find 20 years of a father's pride that I was too cowardly to show you while I lived. I love you, and I'm sorry it took my death to prove it. My family was gathering their belongings, preparing to leave after what had clearly been the most shocking day of their lives. I watched them huddle together near the exit, whispering among themselves with the frantic energy of people trying to process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew. "Captain Chen," I said quietly, "I'd like to visit this address before I return to North Carolina. Would it be possible for my family to accompany us? I think there's something they need to see." She nodded. "Of course, ma'am. I'll arrange transportation." 20 minutes later, we were driving through Georgetown in a small convoy of military vehicles. My family sat in uncomfortable silence in the vehicle behind mine, no doubt wondering what other surprises this day might hold. The address led us to an elegant townhouse on a tree-lined street in one of Washington's most prestigious neighborhoods. The brass nameplate beside the front door read, "The Robert Reynolds Center for Military Family Support." Captain Chen used the key my father had provided to open the front door. Inside, I found something that took my breath away. The entire first floor had been converted into a memorial to my military career. The walls were lined with professionally framed photographs spanning 2 decades of service. My graduation from the Naval Academy, my first promotion ceremony, images from deployments I had forgotten anyone had documented. There were newspaper clippings about operations I had led, citations from awards I had received, even photographs of me with Iraqi children during a humanitarian mission in 2009. But it wasn't just photographs. Display cases contained memorabilia from every stage of my career. My father had somehow acquired copies of my fitness reports, letters of commendation from superior officers, even personal letters I had written home that he had kept despite never responding to them. The centerpiece of the room was a large oak desk that held a leather-bound scrapbook with Major General Sarah Elizabeth Reynolds, USMC, embossed in gold lettering on the cover. I opened it with trembling hands. The first page contained a photograph of me at age 8, dressed in a Halloween costume that resembled military fatigues. Beneath it, in my father's careful handwriting, the day I knew she was destined for greatness. Page after page revealed a father's secret pride. Every achievement documented, every milestone celebrated, every sacrifice acknowledged. Articles about the first women to serve in combat roles, with my name highlighted wherever it appeared. Program announcements from military academies where I had spoken as a guest lecturer. Even printouts of news stories about successful operations I had led, with careful notes in the margins documenting his research into my role in each mission. My family had followed me into the room and now stood in stunned silence, staring at this shrine to a daughter they had dismissed for 2 decades. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Robert did all this?" I turned the pages slowly, each one revealing another piece of evidence that my father had not only been aware of my achievements, but had been celebrating them privately while publicly maintaining the family's narrative of disappointment. There was a section dedicated to letters he had written but never sent, dozens of them addressed to me at various military installations over the years. Letters congratulating me on promotions, expressing concern during dangerous deployments, sharing pride in accomplishments he had researched on his own. Letters that revealed a father's love that had been silenced by family pressure and social expectations. One letter, dated just after my promotion to Brigadier General, was particularly heartbreaking. "My dearest Sarah, I watched the ceremony online today and wept with pride. You stood on that stage with such dignity and strength, and I knew that I had failed you by not being there. Your mother says that acknowledging your achievements would only encourage you to stay away from the family. But she's wrong. You stayed away because we gave you no reason to come home. I am so sorry, my brave daughter. I am so very sorry." Charlotte was crying openly now, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking under the weight of this revelation. Marcus stood frozen, staring at a wall covered with photographs of me in combat gear, his expression shifting between disbelief and something that might have been remorse. But the most devastating discovery was in the final section of the scrapbook. My father had documented every family gathering I had missed, not to catalog my failures as a daughter, but to record his own failures as a father. Each missed birthday, each unanswered letter, each holiday spent alone while I served overseas was accompanied by notes expressing his regret for choosing family peace over paternal support. "She called 3 times during Marcus's wedding reception," read one entry from 2018. I wanted to answer, to tell her how proud I was of her promotion, but Patricia said it would be inappropriate. I let it go to voicemail. I hate myself for choosing appearances over my daughter. Captain Chen, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Ma'am, there's more. Your father arranged for this building to serve as a resource center for military families dealing with deployment separations and reintegration challenges. He endowed it with $2 million and specifically requested that it be named in your honor. The staff is already hired, the programs are designed, and the first families are scheduled to begin counseling next month. I looked around this monument to a father's hidden love and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. He had been weak, yes, but he had also been trapped by expectations and relationships that had made expressing his true feelings impossible. My mother approached me slowly, her face streaked with tears. Sarah, we had no idea. Robert never showed us any of this. We believed. You believed what you wanted to believe, I said quietly. You convinced yourselves that my service was an embarrassment, because it was easier than admitting you might be wrong about what matters in life. Marcus stepped forward, his voice hoarse. Sarah, I don't know how do we fix this? How do we come back from 20 years of being so completely wrong? I closed the scrapbook carefully and looked at each of them. My mother, deflated and ashamed. Charlotte, finally seeing the sister she had dismissed for decades. Marcus, confronting the reality that his business achievements paled in comparison to what I had accomplished. You don't fix it, I said finally. You live with it. You learn from it. And maybe, if you're lucky, you become better people because of it. I walked to the window and looked out at Georgetown Street, thinking about the path that had brought me to this moment. The years of rejection, the loneliness of serving without family support, the quiet strength I had built in the absence of their approval. I don't need your validation anymore, I continued, turning back to face them. I spent too many years hoping you would see me, hoping you would be proud, hoping you would understand. I found my validation in the Marines I led, the lives I saved, the difference I made. I found my family in the men and women who served beside me. Charlotte spoke through her tears. But we're your real family, doesn't that count for something? Family isn't about DNA, Charlotte. It's about showing up. It's about supporting each other through the hard times. It's about celebrating each other's successes, even when you don't understand them. You never did any of that. I picked up the brass key that had opened this building and held it up to the light. Dad understood that, finally. He created this place because he realized that real family means sacrifice, support, and service to something bigger than yourself. He spent his last months trying to build bridges that you all had burned years ago. Secretary Harrison appeared in the doorway, having arrived for a final walkthrough of the center. Major General Reynolds, I wanted to see your father's final project before I returned to the Pentagon. This is extraordinary. One of the most comprehensive support centers for military families I've ever seen. She surveyed the memorial room, taking in the scope of documentation and tribute. Your father clearly understood something that many civilian families never grasp, that military service requires sacrifices, not just from the service member, but from everyone who loves them. This center will help other families avoid the mistakes yours made. The words were a final judgment, delivered with the authority of the nation's highest defense official. As we prepared to leave the center, my family walked slowly through the rooms, seeing for the first time the full scope of the life I had built without them. The photographs of Marines under my command, the awards for humanitarian service, the documentation of operations that had saved countless lives. Outside on the Georgetown sidewalk, we stood in the fading afternoon light, knowing that this was probably the last time we would all be together. What happens now? My mother asked. Now you go back to Connecticut and live with the knowledge of who your daughter really was, I replied. You tell people the truth about my service when they ask. You stop pretending I was an embarrassment and start acknowledging that I was an honor. Marcus extended his hand tentatively. Sarah, I know I don't deserve it, but is there any chance? Could we try to build something better from here? I looked at his hand for a long moment before shaking it briefly. I'm not interested in rebuilding our relationship, Marcus. Too much damage has been done. But I'm willing to coexist with civility for Dad's sake. We can be polite strangers instead of hostile ones. Charlotte sobbed openly. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so ashamed of how we treated you. Your shame doesn't undo 20 years of rejection, Charlotte. But maybe it will prevent you from making the same mistakes with your own children. Captain Chen approached with my transportation back to the airport. Ma'am, your flight to North Carolina departs in 3 hours. We should head to the airport. I turned for one final look at the Robert Reynolds Center for Military Family Support, the building that represented my father's final attempt to honor the daughter he had failed to support in life. Tell people who I really was, I said to my family. Tell them about this place. Tell them that Robert Reynolds' greatest achievement wasn't building shopping centers, it was raising a daughter who served her country with honor. As the military vehicle pulled away from the curb, I watched through the rear window as my family stood together on the sidewalk, finally understanding what they had lost through their years of rejection and dismissal. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction in their pain, just a quiet sense of completion. My father's final gift had been truth. The truth about his hidden pride, the truth about my achievements, and the truth about the family that had never deserved the daughter they rejected. The war was over. I had won not through vengeance or cruelty, but through the simple power of living well and serving something greater than myself. And that, finally, was enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.